Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over the Course Technology JavaScript 6th edition book PowerPoints, and we're up to Chapter 3, Building Arrays and Controlling Flow. Alright, let me start this maybe in a little bit different way than what I've been doing before, but what I want to do is this. Years ago, and you may or may not care about this, and that's okay. Let's see. But years ago, I used to live in an apartment complex, and there were 8 families in there. So if you can imagine, okay, there was a mailbox that, you know, and I'm not using any drawing tool here, but just so you can see kind of what it looked like. Oops. All right, so it kind of, you know, kind of looked like this. Where it was kind of split up. So we had apartment 1, and we had apartment 2, and we had apartment 3, and apartment 4, and apartment 5, and apartment 6, and apartment 7, and apartment 8. All right, so that should look at least somewhat familiar to you. All right, but the idea, and it's been so many years, I don't even remember the exact address of the apartment I lived at, but let's suppose it's the old proverbial 123 Main Street. And if I lived in apartment 4, it would be 123 Main Street, apartment number 4. So maybe I lived there. Maybe the Greens lived in apartment 1, the Browns lived in apartment 2, the Whites in apartment 3, the Smiths in apartment 5, the Joneses in apartment 6, the Kleins in apartment 7, and the Millers in apartment 8, something along those lines. We all had the same address, 123 Main Street. What was different was the apartment number, and there's probably a pretty good chance that if someone didn't know the apartment number and just typed in 123 Main Street and sent it, it would probably get routed to the right number. So why am I telling you this? All right, well, this is actually a very good lead-in to the concept of arrays. Imagine, in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add 2 more here. And there's, as always, there's a method to my madness here, so if you just bear with me for a second. All right, but I want to add, let's say that we had let's say that we're 10 in here. All right. All right. Let's say that rather than apartments, these were representing students, and my students had just taken their first test. All right. So I have 10 grades. So I could say student, I could put a var in here, var student 1, and that student got an 88. Var student 2, and that student got a 59. Var student 3, and that student got an 81. You get the idea. In fact, I'll just do this very quickly. All right. And I could do that, and I can add one more student down here. That student got 100. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, granted, I'm kind of being very weird here with the scores because they wouldn't be all that much the same, and you get it, but that's fine. The point I'm trying to make, though, is I could do that, and I could have 10 different scores. 10 students, 10 scores. Again, these could all be different scores. We don't care. Those aren't what are as important. But if I do this, I'm making 10 different grades. which kind of to me seems like a waste. All right. But the other thing I can do is I can come in JavaScript and I can say var students equals, and then I can put in bracket bracket. And that creates an empty array. If I know there's 10 students in there, I can put a 10 in there. All right. But the way that I end up doing this is going to be different. So when if I want to fill that array up with those grades, all right, then I don't have var like this. First thing to note that you'll have to notice is when you work with computers, you start counting at 0. All right, for most things, not everything, but for most things, you end up starting at 0. So your first student is going to actually be student 0. All right, and what we do there is we put this in brackets. Oops. Oopsie. So that's how I do it. All right. And again, I'm not that concerned. I'm getting a little anal here about lining stuff up, but just so you know it. So what this does right here is it creates 10 contiguous memory locations. It kind of creates this. But by default, there's nothing in any of those, or else there'll be a 0 in each one. So let's get rid of this because we don't really care about that one anymore. All right. So when we do this, we're coming up for student 0 and we're saying, okay, in that location, put an 88. And then, I'm sorry, that's a 100, I guess. Put a 100 in there. Then for the next student, change that, put in an 88. Then for the next student, put in a 59. Now, I'm not going to keep going because I think you all understand where this is going. All right. So when I say students, and that shouldn't be student, it should be students. So as I start to fill it, the first one is, this is pronounced students sub 0. Sub is short for the word subscript. All right. And what we're saying here is that we have what? We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 array, what are called array elements, but we start counting at 0. So the first element is not element 1. The first element then automatically becomes element 0. And the last element in our 10 element array is not element 10, it's element 9. Now, if we check the length of this, it'll still say that there's 10. But there's an old programmer joke that says, ask a programmer to count to 10, and they will tell you 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right? So just so you're aware of that, I just wanted to show you a few little things in here. All right? And I'm going to create another program for you in just a couple minutes. Okay? So, in this chapter, we learned to store data in arrays. I was already showing you that. We learned different looping constructs. The three of the loops that are available to you in JavaScript, those are the while loop, the do while loop, and the for loop. We'll look at each one of those. We'll look at the continue statement, and along with that, even though it's not shown here, we'll look at the break statement. We've looked a little bit already at if and else. All right, but we'll look at it again, but we'll also use what's called the switch statement, and we'll look at that. Then I'll show you a cool little program to nest one thing inside of another, and we'll make a little clock. So we'll do all that. All right, so an array. An array is a set of data that's represented by a single name. Now, even though I showed, the example here shows these are all strings, etc., remember that since JavaScript is a loosely typed language, not every element in the array has to be the same type. So I can mix numbers and strings and booleans and whatever I want to mix. And you can only do that because it's a loosely typed language. All right? So, in array literal, the most common way to create an array, it declares a variable and specifies the content. So we could have done this. I could have put those numbers in there. I could have said var students equal 100, 88, 59, etc. We could have done that too. All right, here's an example of doing that with a bunch of strings. Every location, every piece of data in the array is called an array element. It's also known as an array index because you use the index to tell you what the current element is. And again, you start counting with 0, as we already mentioned. You can go and assign individual values. I just showed you that, where I said, for example, tests sub 4 equals 88. That kind of an idea. Or scores, whatever it was. You can create an array without any elements, and as I mentioned, so really, with the example that I showed you where we put this, we could have left that blank. It really and truly wouldn't matter, but that's at least letting the compiler know that there will be 10 elements in there. And then we fill up the 10 elements. What if we decide, what if we get another student? All right, even though we said var students equal 10, even though we did this, if we get a new student, let's grab that one, just make that student 11. Or a student 10, I should say. Okay, so we can still do that. And again, that's one thing that's different about an array from a loosely typed language like JavaScript is that you can add to the array once you've created it. In a strongly typed language like C# or Java, you cannot do that. But in this language, you can. And again, each element can hold a different value. So if I wanted to, let's say that we knew one of the students didn't take the test because she or he was sick. So we could literally do this, out sick. We can do that. Even though we're mixing numeric and non-numeric types, we can do that because the language that we're using is it's a loosely typed language. Okay? All right. You've already seen that, how you can access an element's value. Okay. Now, don't worry about the inner HTML and all this stuff. Again, the author, I praise the authors for what they're trying to do. All right. In that they're trying to introduce a lot to you. But when we get to, I think it's chapter 5, is all on the document object model. And when we get to that, a lot of that stuff that you see right there that might look a little strange to you right now, you'll have to take my word for it, will make a lot more sense when we do that. If you want to know how long the array is, you can use the name of the array .length. And it's a property. Arrays are objects in JavaScript. So if I did right here, if I said document.write array length is plus students.length. All right, so if I did that, let me make this a little bit smaller. All right, so if I did this right here, since I've just created the array, that's going to print out what? Well, you'd probably think 10, because that's how many elements we said we were in, that were in here. But if we did this after we added an 11th element, now if we did it, it's going to print out 11. All right, JavaScript allows you to create arrays in different ways. Since an array is an object, you can create it in the way that I showed you, using basically what's typically referred to as array literal notation, or you can create an array like this. Is there an advantage to creating an array like that? Not at all. But that's how you basically create other objects, in arrays of other objects in Java. All right? So, in JavaScript, I should say. All right. Again, the tag name, the ID, let's put that off if we can until we get into Chapter 5. All right, let's talk a little bit about repeating code. And again, I'm of the mindset that if I show this to you, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, so we've got this functions that we did here and the one we did here. That's all fine and dandy. I'm going to close those. I'm going to come back to where I had that Chapter 2. I'm going to copy the folder. And that's going to become my Chapter 3 folder. All right, and I'm not going to worry about a functions and a functions 2. I'm going to get rid of the functions, and I'm going to get rid of the index. I'm just going to keep my index 2 and my functions 2. All right, we may end up writing more than that, but for right now, let's just look at this. All right, now, I'm not going to worry about any of this stuff. I'm not going to write functions, a lot of big functions, etc. I'm not going to do all that stuff. All I want to do, the goal right now, is I want to print out the numbers from 1 to 10. So I'm going to create a variable that's called x, and I'm going to start it at 1, and I want it to print out x equal 1. Then on the next line, x equal 2. Then on the next line, x equal 3. Okay, hopefully you get the idea. So the first time I do this, I'm going to use a while loop. And I'm going to say var x equal 1. There's its value. Now I'll say while x is less than or equal to 10, document.write x equals plus x plus our old friend, the line break. All right. Now, if I were to run this just like this, think about what's going to happen. It's going to come in here. It's going to say, okay, x is 1. Is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. So it's going to print out x equal 1. Then it's going to come back up here again and say, is it less than 10? Well, it's 1, so it still is. What I've shown you right here, and I'm not going to run this because it creates what's called an infinite loop condition, where it's just going to keep printing x equal 1, x equal 1, x equal 1, x equal 1, x equal 1. So what we want to do is we want to change the value of x. So we want to say x plus plus. All right, so you can see exactly what's happening here. So I'm going to leave that just like it is. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to run the program. There's my run program, x equal 1 all the way to 10. That's exactly what we'd want to have happen. So what we used here is what's called a while loop. And a while loop is called a pretest loop. Can you guess if I did this, how many times would I go through the loop? Well, it would come in here and it would say, is 11 less than 10? No, it's not. So it would skip it and it would not write anything. Let's see if we can prove that. So I just changed it and I saved it. So let's go back and run this again. Now you just saw it over here where it was x equal 1 to 10. Now, it prints out nothing. All right. So it's called a pretest loop because you make the test before you go into the body of the loop. And the body of the loop is what's enclosed in the curly braces. So when you do a loop like this, there's 3 components. The first thing is x is a crummy name. I like to actually use LCV, which stands for loop control variable. Why not call it what it is? This is considered really the only time that it's okay in programming to give things bad names. Things like X, Y, X or Y or whatever. All right, the program's going to now run again and it's going to look just the same as it did before, and it's not going to be anything fantastic, but notice it now says LCV equal 1 through 10. All right, but what I want to get across to you is in this example, This is known as a pretest loop. So you have to initialize your loop, then you test it. If the test is true, you do what's in the curly braces, then you come up and test it again. If you do not change the value of your loop control variable, you'll be in an infinite loop. Sometimes you actually want to have code that runs in an infinite loop that runs forever. All right? Most of the time when you get into an infinite loop, it's a mistake. So I'm going to change this so I want it to say while loop. Okay, so keep that there and rerun it. So while loop, LCV equals 1 through 10. So you can all see that. All right, now I'm going to keep that there. And I'm actually going to go and copy the code that's right there. And I'm going to paste it in. All right, now I'll call this one, since that's LCV, I'll call it LCV2. All right, and this is going to use what's called a do while loop. I'm going to have to make a couple changes in here. All right, remember, we said this before. This is called a pretest because you make the test before you go into the body of the loop. With a do while, you put the word do here and you test at the end of the loop. And this is the only time for any kind of loop or anything like this that you must put a semicolon in there. All right? This is going to print out exactly the same as what you saw before. It might actually print out even to 11 in here. Let's look. So this will now say do while LCV2 equals. So let's run this one. All right, no, it still went from 1 to 10. But what I'm trying to show you here, and I should have actually put in here, let's see, let's put in right here a document.write, and let's put in 2 BR tags, just so this reads a little bit better, that's all. Okay, so now we've got some space between there. But notice in both cases, we print out the numbers from 1 to 10. The difference is in this second example, in the first example, we tested it before we got into the loop body. In the second example, we don't make the test till the end of the loop body. It's also called a post test. So even if it's false to begin with, like that, where we have 11, you always run through the body of the loop at least once. So notice, always. So the while loop is used much more often than the do while, but at times it makes sense to use the do while. There's a third type of loop that you can use in here, so I'm going to copy this information that we just had, and I'm going to paste again. So here's my 2 line breaks. Now, I'm not going to create a loop variable here, all right, but I'm going to use the word for, and I'm going to say for var LCV3, okay, we're going to set it equal to 1, and while LCV3 is less than or equal to 10, then we'll say LCV3 plus plus. So notice we're doing everything. The initializing our loop control variable, the testing, and the incrementing all on the same line. So now we don't need this line anymore because we're already adding to it. And we don't need the while on the end here. But we should change this from do while to for loop. And it'll be LCV3 here and here. All right, so let's save. Let's come over here. We'll refresh. And now we have all 3 loops. All right. What I'm planning on doing is I'm planning on taking all this stuff that I'm creating and keeping it, putting it all out there for you. Okay? All right, so you can see now the 3 basic types of loops. Like the while loop, the for loop is a pretest. So if this had said 11, I would never have gone through the loop at all because 11 is not less than or equal to 10. So I just changed it to 11. Let's refresh and run it again, and notice it prints nothing because it was false initially. All right, let's change it back so it's correct. Double check and make sure that it still runs okay. Oopsie, that's not what I wanted to do. It's That's not what I wanted to do either. Remember, you always have to, when you run these, you just say run, and then you tell it to browsers, I want it in Chrome, so they're run the program, so they're all back. Okay? All right. Let's continue on then. I've just explained to you what a loop statement is, and I just explained to you the while loop, the do while loop, and the for loop. So you can look through these yourselves, but there's probably little to nothing that's in here that I haven't already gone over with you. So that was the while. Then there's the do while. Again, that's the only time you put the semicolon at the end. And there's the for loop. All right. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of the slides and whatever that's in here. The reason I'm doing it like this is what I'm trying to show you, all right? What I'm trying to show you in here is to give you demos of this stuff, because I think it makes a lot more sense to show you this stuff running than it does just to talk about it. All right? So let's talk about continue, and we'll also talk about the word break. And I don't think that one's in here yet, but we'll get into it anyway. What I'm going to do for now is I'm going to take all that code that we just put in there for those loops. All right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I'll leave the while loop there, but I'm going to take the other ones. So everything that comes after that, and I'm going to comment it out, because I don't really need any of the rest of it. All right? So what I have left in here right now is just the while loop stuff. Okay? All right. So we're just skipping all the stuff that's in green. But now what I want to do is I want to do this. I want to basically say, what I want to do here is I want to print out while loop, LCV equals, etc. But I'm going to put in here an if statement that says if LCV, if it's equal to 4, I just pick that number randomly. So I'm going to say if it's equal to 4, now the first thing I'm going to say here is break. All right? So let's save this and run it and take a look at what our output is. Remember, it said if the loop control variable is equal to 4, break. So what do we get? 1, 2, 3. All right? So what that said, what that told us to do was, if our loop control variable is equal to this value, break totally out of the while loop and go to right here. And since there's nothing else, that's all it gave us. What if instead of the word break, and I'll leave that in here, but I'm going to comment it out for now. So what if instead of break, I put in here the word continue? All right, so we've got continue in there. So let's run this again. And it doesn't like something I've done, so let's check and see what I have done. Yeah, that should be okay. What the problem is, I still need that LCV++. Continue tells it, okay, skip the rest of this and go back up to the top. But since I never added 1 to it, I'm putting myself into an infinite loop condition. So let's do this. We'll set this equal to 0 to start with, and we'll do our LCV++. We'll do that at the very top. You say, well, what did you do that for? Let's run it and take a look first. All right, so let's run this. We'll refresh and run it. Still doesn't like it. While is less than 10, LCV++. Okay. If LCV is equal to 4, continue. So what it should do is it should skip this document.write. It should skip that. It should hit that and jump back up to the top. So why isn't it doing that? I've used continuous before and never had a problem with it. Let's see what the book shows. If x equal 3, well, that's very similar to what I did. In fact, let's use their example. That's okay. I'm not too proud. So I will go back to here. I will comment out all of this. Let's get rid of everything that we put in here. So let's get rid of this. All right, we can leave that. Let's make sure we didn't break anything. And I think I might still be in an infinite loop. That might be what the problem in there was. Okay, it's back. It's going to 11 now instead of 10 because I started that at 0 instead of starting it at 1. And so we just change that to less than 10. That should fix that. There's our 1 to 10. Okay, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to comment all of it out. And I'm going to add in, again, I might have just had something wrong, a typo or something, but that's what they put in the book. All right, so let's look at what they've got here in the book. I like to put my curlies on a separate line. I think the thing reads much better when you do it this way. You may or may not agree with what I just did. All right. So this is saying count is 1 to 5. If it's equal, it shouldn't, triple equal shouldn't matter there, but maybe it does. All right, so if it is 3, continue. So what this should write out, I need this document dot right here. What this should actually write out are the numbers from 1 to 5, but it should skip 3. So let's see if indeed it does. Good golly. I'm definitely doing something that's wrong here, but I'm trying to look for it here and I don't see it. For var count equal 1, count less than or equal to 5, count plus plus. If count is equal to 3, continue. Which should say that they should print out, the first time through it should be 1, and it should print out 1. Then the second time through it's 2, so it should print out 2. The third time through it is 3, so it should continue, so it should skip that, and then come back, so it should print out 1, 2, 4, 5 is what should happen, but it's not printing on a doggone thing. And let's look at why. That's the culprit right there. That was the problem all along. All right, I had one too many curly braces in there. Let's run it again. This should run just fine now. 1, 2, 4, 5. So you see how it skips 3. All right. All right, so you now have examples really of all those in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally continue statement. All right. I'm going to grab this entire thing here, even where it says continue statement, and I'm going to copy it in there again. This one's going to say break statement. All right. And this one will say here break. All right. And then we've got a while loop example. We've got a do while example. And finally, we have a for loop example. So you now have all those in there. All right. Let's make sure I didn't break anything. There's my 1, 2, 4, 5, and there's my 1, 2. That's from the break statement. So when I said I don't want to break anything, that was no pun intended. Please believe me. All right, now I'm going to just comment out basically everything I've done so far, because you now have seen examples of all of them. All right, you've seen an example of the while loop, you've seen an example of the do while loop, you've seen an example of the for loop, you've seen an example of the break statement, and you've seen an example of the continue statement. So we've now gone through all of these. Now we've gone through the if statement before, so you've seen that. And again, the if is the most common. And again, rather than showing it to you like that and going through the if and the if else, and they're all good examples. All right, let's stop right here and let's go back to our code. Okay. And you see all that code, that's all the earlier stuff that we put in. So I'm just keep building upward here. So I'm going to say here var number equal. I'm going to ask you to read it a number. Okay. I'm going to parse it. So parse int prompt enter a number please. And I'll default the number to 12. I just made it up. All right. Let's see. So let's say if is n a n number. So if we did enter something that was non-numeric, what we'll do is we'll just say number equal 37. Again, I'm just making that number up. All right. So if what we entered above in here was not numeric, we're just going to set it to a number. All right. Now we're going to say var result equal number modulo 2. So we're taking the number and dividing it by 2, and we're looking at the remainder, which is always going to be either 0 if it's a positive number, or 1 if it's, 0 if it's an even number, or 1 if it's an odd number. All right? So if result equal 1, document dot write the number, and then we'll actually print out the number, is odd. It's an odd number. Else, we're going to print the same thing, but we're going to say that the number is even, because it is. All right. And we can run this a few times. Again, you always want to run. Oh, it doesn't like something I put in here. I'm missing a paren. I'm famous for that. All right, hopefully that fixed it. Let's try. Golly. All right, so enter number 12. The number 12 is even. Well, that's what we'd expect, right? Okay, so let's put something non-numeric in. Remember, it'll change it then to 37. The number 37 is odd. That's good. 123, which should be odd, and it is. 124, which should be even, and it is. So it appears to be working just fine. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong, nothing at all wrong with what we just did. All right? But we are going to try to see if we can make it a little bit, or write it in a different way. I was going to say make it better, but that's all a matter of opinion as to whether what I'm about to show you is better or not better. Okay? So I can take that code that we put in here that said this, all this if statement, this if else, which works just fine. There's not a problem with it. But I'm going to comment it out. All right, and now after I do this, and I say result is equal to number modulo 2, I'm going to do what's called a switch statement. So I'm going to do a switch on the word result. All right, and I have to put that in curly braces. And basically what I'm saying here is if the result is 0, then what I want to do is I want to document.write the number is even, and I want to break because I want to get out of here. I'm all done. Case 1, we want to do the same thing, but again, we want to print out, instead of saying that it's even, we want to print out that it's odd. Now, those should be the only two things that can happen. But just to be safe, we can put in here a default, which means if somehow something other than a 0 or a 1 appears here, I can just do document.write and error occurred. That should never happen, but just to protect myself, I'm going to put that in there. Break. All right, so I rewrote this if statement right here, and I did it using what's called a switch statement. It should work 100% exactly the same way that it just did previously. 12 is even, put in something non-numeric, it's odd. What did we try before? How about 34? Should be even. And if we try 35, it should be odd. And it's working just fine. All right, so what I've shown you are two different ways of achieving the same result in here. One with using an if-else, and one, all right, and I could have even added to this where I've got this else. I could have said here, else if result equal 0, we're printing it's even, all right, else, and we could have done just like in here, we could have said error occurred. All right, now they're pretty much mirror images of one another. Some people prefer to use ifs most, if not all the time, because it's typically easier to use an if because you can use it for anything. It's harder to use typically for a switch, and we'll get into that in class. But just so you see, there's a couple things that will work the same way. All right, nested if and else statements. Well, when you nest something, you put something inside of something. All right, so I'm going to build something for you right now. Okay. Again, I'm commenting out everything that I've been working on up till this point. You can see it's getting quite large now. We've got, what, upwards of almost 100 lines in here, but that's okay because we're just running through all this stuff. I'm going to have 3 variables. And instead of calling them num1 or lcv, I'm just going to call them x, y, and z. So I'm going to say var x equals 0, var y equals 0, and var z equals 0. Those are my 3 variables. Now I'm going to say for x equal, and I don't even have to set x because I already have set it. So I don't need to say anything, so I can just put that in there. As long as x is less than or equal to 20, x is less than or equal to 23, x plus plus. All right, and then it's going to look a little weird. I'm going to put another loop in here that's going to look almost just like this first one. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to put another loop right there. And this is going to be y. And instead of going from 0 to 23, it's going to go from 0 to 59. And that'll be y. And then I'm going to put one more loop inside of here. And that loop is going to be z. And that's going to look just like this one right here. And then what I want to print out here is I want to do a document.write. Let's see. Say X, and then a colon, and then Y, and then a colon, and then Z. Let's see if I made any mistakes. Then we'll come back and we'll look at the whole thing. All right, but I want to run this program first. Well, there's 0, 0, 0. That's a start, but I know there's an error in here, and I know where the error is, I believe. So let's look. X, X, Y, Y. See that? That should have been Z plus plus. That was a mistake. All right, well, the only thing I forgot, and it looks like 22, 23, it does have 24 in here. I don't want that. That shouldn't be less than or equal to 23. It should be. Well, let's leave it like this. After we print out each one of these, let's print out, so plus our old friend, the line break. All right, let's run it again. Might not be perfect, but it's getting there. I'm making a clock. So I'm going up till 59 seconds. Okay, and it looks like that's all it went till. There's something that's goofed up in here. 0, 0, 0. So 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All the way up to 59 seconds, which is what I wanted. Let's go back. Whoops. Let's go back and take a look at our code in here. The thing that's so elegant about this is I'm making a clock in about 10 lines of code. All right, maybe a little more than that, but you know, under 15 lines. All right, so in fact, we don't even need these. We can get rid of those, so I can make it closer to 10. So I'm going to say var x equals 0, var y equals 0, not varf, var z equals 0. XXX, y, z, z, z. Trying to figure out where my error is, because it shouldn't be, it's stopping after it's going through one iteration here. Looks to me like it should be correct, but it's definitely not acting like it's correct. So now I've got, there it is. All right, there's my clock. Got military time. It goes all the way to 23:59:59. So I built myself a clock, and it took me what? Literally about 10 lines of code. That is a nested loop. There is a for loop within a for loop within a for loop. Play computer here. Hour is 0, second is, I'm sorry, hour is 0, minute is 0, second is 0. Hour is 0, minute is 0, second is 1. You keep doing that until you get to 59 seconds. Then hour is 0, minute is 1, second is 0. You keep doing that until you get up to 1 hour. Then hour is 1, etc. So let's change these. Maybe we can make it a little bit more self-documenting. Let's see. We'll do it like this. you might find that a little bit easier to look at. Hopefully I didn't make any mistakes. All right, it should still, if I've done it correctly, look exactly as it did before. So we'll refresh and we'll run it again. There it is. All the way from 000 to 2359.59. Okay? Again, in my opinion, probably the world's smallest or simplest clock. And it shows because we've got a loop within a loop within a loop. So this goes, and then this goes, and this keeps going until you've met that condition. Then you bump that up, and it keeps going, and eventually you bump that up. I put that in here because hopefully you can look at that and then look at the output and say, oh, that makes sense how you'd have a loop within a loop within a loop, because that's what I'm trying to show you. All right, I'm again going to come in and comment that out. And we're going to go back to our PowerPoints here. All right, so instead of a nested if, I showed you a nested loop. But with a nested if, you've got an if within an if. All right, I showed you the else if already. I showed you the switch already. Here's an example when you use switch. You can actually use strings instead of numbers. So that pretty much is it for this chapter. And as it says right there, an array is a set of data that's represented by a single variable name. All right, arrays are basically they're accessed via their indexes, which is the element's numeric position within the array. Remember, it starts at 0. You can access and modify array elements. You can use the length property to get the length of an array. We also looked at the 3 basic loops, the while loop, the do while loop, and the for loop. We looked at those counters, which I called LCV for loop control variable. We looked at the continue statement, and I even as a bonus gave you the break statement. All right. We went into a little bit more on decision making. We again looked at if else. You saw the same program that was done with both an with an if, an else if, and an else, and then redone using a switch statement. All right. That's pretty much it, I believe, for the chapter. So that's it for chapter 3. When we continue, we'll go into chapter 4, the next chapter. And chapter 4, which begins in our book, and I haven't really even been much using the book, I've just, for now at least, been going by the PowerPoints, is on page 212, and it's entitled Debugging and Error Handling. So we'll come back with that one shortly.